There was a safe in a Paris living room that nobody was allowed to open. For 20 years, the richest men in France lent millions against whatever was inside it. Not one of them ever asked to look. On the 9th of May 1902, a crowd filled a street in Paris. Thousands of people pushed toward one address, waiting for a locksmith to finish his work. They had come to see the inside of a box. Inside that box, supposedly, sat 100 million francs. Bonds, share certificates, the paperwork of a fortune left by a dead American millionaire. Half of Paris had lent money against it. Nobody had ever seen it. The woman who owned the safe was gone. She had run days earlier, along with her husband and her brothers. Her creditors stood in her empty house, still hoping, still telling themselves the money was real. Her name was Thérèse Humbert. For 20 years, she had been one of the most powerful women in France, and every bit of that power rested on a locked steel door that she had never once opened for anyone. To understand how she pulled it off, you have to go back to a poor village near Toulouse, and to a little girl who grew up watching her father lie beautifully to everyone he met. She was born Thérèse d'Arignac in 1856, one of 7 children in a family that had almost nothing. Their house was small, their meals were thin. Their father, though, talked like a man expecting a fortune. He told the whole village he was the secret son of a noblewoman. He said old family papers proved it. He kept those papers, he said, locked inside a heavy studded chest that he showed people but never opened. Shopkeepers gave him credit because of that chest. Neighbors treated his children like fallen aristocrats. Thérèse grew up believing a fortune was coming, and believing that a locked box was as good as money in the bank. Then her father died. The family opened the famous chest in front of everyone. There were no noble papers inside. There was only a brick. Remember that brick, because the story ends with another one. Most people would have been crushed by that humiliation. Thérèse took a different lesson from it. She had just watched a worthless brick feed a family for years, and she understood exactly why it had worked. She was not beautiful, and she was barely educated. She worked as a washerwoman. But when she spoke, people leaned in. As a teenager, she borrowed jewelry from her friends so she could look rich for an afternoon. Then she aimed higher. Frédéric Humbert was a law student and the son of Gustave Humbert, mayor of Toulouse, a senator, one of the most respected legal minds in the country. Thérèse decided she would marry him. To make herself worth marrying, she invented an inheritance. She told him a wealthy spinster had left her a chateau. It did not exist. The family found out, the couple ran off, and the wedding happened anyway. Now she had the Humbert name, and the Humbert name opened doors. What she needed next was a story big enough to carry a lifetime of borrowing. In 1879, she found it on a train. This is the version she told for the rest of her life. Traveling alone, she heard groaning through the wall of the next compartment. The corridor was blocked, so she climbed out of her window along the moving carriage. Inside, she found an old man having a heart attack. She revived him with smelling salts. He told her his name was Robert Henry Crawford, an American millionaire, and he promised that one day he would repay her kindness. It is a ridiculous story. A woman crawling along the outside of a speeding train. A dying stranger who happens to be rich. And yet nobody in France seriously questioned it for the next 20 years. 2 years later, a letter arrived. Crawford was dead, and he had left her his fortune. 100 million francs in bonds and securities. In today's money, that is somewhere in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Here is the clever part. The will came with conditions. The fortune had to stay sealed inside a safe until her younger sister Marie was old enough to marry one of Crawford's 2 American nephews. Read that again. The story itself contained the excuse for why nobody could ever check it. The money was real, she said, but the law would not let her touch it, or show it, or count it. The safe was installed in her Paris home on Avenue de la Grande Armée. A heavy iron thing, sitting in its own room, polished by the servants every week like a shrine. Guests were allowed to stare at it. And then she started borrowing. The pitch was simple. Lend me money now, and when the safe finally opens, you will be repaid several times over. Bankers heard that and started reaching for their pens. The first serious loan was around 6 million francs. She spent it exactly the way you would expect. A mansion in the best part of Paris, chateau in the south, a steam yacht, and a private box at the opera. But a story like this has a weakness. Sooner or later, somebody asks when the safe opens. So Thérèse gave her creditors an enemy. She told them the Crawford nephews were fighting her in court. The lawsuits were real. Real judges, Real filings, real years of delay. What nobody realized was who was on the other side. The two American nephews suing her were her own brothers, Romain and Emile. They showed up in French courtrooms doing terrible American accents, demanding their share, refusing to settle. Every hearing they lost or dragged out was another year the safe stayed shut, and another year she could keep borrowing. The fake lawsuits did something even better. They produced genuine court rulings, stamped and signed, some of them from the highest court in France. She now had official paperwork that appeared to prove the fortune existed. Think about what that means. She was not forging documents in a back room. She was using the French legal system itself as her forger, and it worked for 2 decades without anyone spotting the trick. Meanwhile, the money kept flowing in. Old loans were paid with new loans. Interest was paid with more borrowing. It was a pyramid, 20 years before Charles Ponzi ever put his name to the idea. Her salon became the place to be seen. Ministers came. Senators came. Judges came. She threw garden parties, filled rooms with flowers, and let all of Paris watch her spend money she did not have. And sitting above all of it was her father-in-law. In 1882, Gustave Humbert became Minister of Justice of France. The man in charge of the courts was family. Nobody wanted to accuse his daughter-in-law of anything. The doubts existed. They just never went anywhere. In 1883, a newspaper called Le Matin printed an article questioning the whole inheritance. Her father-in-law publicly backed her story, and the questions quietly died. By now, she was not only borrowing from banks, she set up her own life annuity company and sold pensions to ordinary people. Teachers, shopkeepers, widows. They handed over their savings for a guaranteed income. That money went straight into paying her older debts. The people who trusted her with their retirement were funding the interest on loans from bankers who had never met them. Everyone was standing on the same empty box. An official from the Bank of France, Jules Bizat, finally asked her a simple question. Where exactly was the money invested? She told him government bonds. He went and checked, and there were no bonds anywhere. In a courtroom, a tired lawyer asked her where the Crawford nephews actually lived. She answered without hesitating. 1302 Broadway. That was her entire American address for a family supposedly worth 100 million francs. Then a banker died. His name was Gerard, and his bank in Elbeuf had lent her enormous sums. When his own business started failing, he begged her to repay him. She brushed him off. He shot himself. That death changed the mood. Lawyers started comparing notes. One of them had a son-in-law she had ruined, and he went to Le Matin with everything he knew. This time, the newspaper did not back down. Article after article, the paper accused her outright of being a fraud, and it asked the one question she had spent 20 years avoiding. If the fortune is real, why not simply open the safe? Her creditors did the maths and went cold. Add up everything she had borrowed, and the total was far more than the inheritance could ever cover, even if it existed. In 1901, they took her to court. Her lawyers fought it hard. They argued that opening the safe would break the terms of the will and destroy the fortune. The judge was not moved. He ordered the safe opened and set the date, the 9th of May 1902. For the first time in 20 years, Thérèse Humbert had a deadline she could not argue with, could not delay, and could not talk her way out of. So she did the only thing left. She ran. She, her husband, and her brothers slipped out of Paris and across the border into Spain. Behind them they left a house full of furniture, a mountain of debt, and one locked safe. So we are back where we started. A crowd outside the house, officials inside, journalists ready, a locksmith working on the door of the most famous piece of furniture in France, while thousands waited in the street. The safe opened. Inside there was no fortune. Accounts from the day differ on the details, but they agree on the spirit of it. An old newspaper, a worthless coin, a single trouser button, and a brick. A brick. The same thing her father had left inside his own locked chest, decades earlier, in a village where nobody had anything. She had taken his little village trick and sold it to the richest country in Europe. The damage was instant. Banks took losses they never fully admitted. Thousands of small savers lost everything. Even the painter Henri Matisse was caught in it, because his wife's family had worked for the Humberts and were dragged into the scandal. Police across Europe hunted them. The Humberts, meanwhile, were in Madrid, calmly watching the celebrations for the young Spanish king. They were arrested there in December 1902 and sent back to France to stand trial for fraud. The trial in August 1903 was a national spectacle. She denied everything, insisted the fortune existed, and promised to produce the Crawfords. She never did. She and her husband each got 5 years. Her brothers got less. She was released early, and then she simply vanished. Some say she died poor in Chicago. Others say she never left France. Either way, she proved something ugly. People will believe almost anything, as long as they are not allowed to look.